Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Tana the Bloodsower and Tymna the Weaver, a token creation deck. This deck comes to us from Captain Doge, who says, the idea for this deck was a token deck where tokens were made by creatures that made them from damage or when they attack, for example, Tana. So it went down the kind of feather plan of combat tricks. But then you might not have a big enough creature to attack with, so I put counters in it now, and now it's kind of this weird hybrid combat trick counter deck. Token half works amazing, love that part, and Tymna is only really there to draw cards. As for a budget, I would say I only want to spend about $300 altogether for changes. Absolutely, we can definitely work on that. And I think it's a great time to mention that Tana and Tymna, or Tymna and Tana as I'm more familiar with, was my first pseudo-proxy CDH deck. I have a lot of affection for these two, especially Tymna, who still sees play in my Brina deck, as she is quite a beast, to be honest. But Tana is a really, really cool character and a really, really cool card, and her token generation is really sweet. So I do love this idea of building around that. So with that in mind, I do really like the deck. I definitely have a handful of additions and some nitpicks to pull out, but let's look at our commanders and get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who are our two commanders and why are they our partners for our token generation deck? Well, Tana is kind of the poster child for how we want to generate tokens, so she's the perfect commander here, so let's start with her. Tana is a 4-mana elf druid in red and green, 2/2. She has trample, and whenever she deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green sapperling creature tokens. Very simple, very elegant, I really do like that, and scales very well. I think, honestly, one of the things that's nice about it is, I'd say probably the sweet spot is when you can do like 5 damage through, you know, like get 5 damage trampled over to get 5 sapperlings, and then after that you can start, you know, increasing your other creatures. But because she's your commander and how commander damage works, there's actually not a really big ceiling on her power, because once you get her to like 7 damage going through, you're threatening 3 hits to kill a player, and more makes that easier. So Tana, as like a package and just a character or just a card for this deck, is very, very good. Then of course, partnered with her is Tymna the Weaver. As mentioned before, this is a card I'm very, very fond of. She is a 3-mana human cleric, 2/2 lifelink, and she is at the beginning of your post-combat main phase. You may pay X life, where X is the number of opponents that were dealt combat damage this turn if you do draw X cards. Very simply put, she turns the number of opponents you hit with combat damage into cards. And that's really, really good. And the fact that she doesn't have any form of summoning sickness or any, like, in her ability, she doesn't need to attack and slam Tymna, attack with a few little creatures here and there, and for each one that gets through, you draw a card, is just so much card advantage, especially early on. Sometimes I feel like Tymna is like almost good enough as a singular commander because of what she does, but of course, when you have partner, you take advantage of partner. So looking at the deck proper, a lot of this makes a lot of sense to me. We have a lot of really strong creatures that either interact with tokens, interact with counters, or sometimes both. And then we have, after that, we have a very good amount of sorceries. Some of them are kind of not combat tricks, but ways to increase the power of our commander or our other Tana style cards, which I didn't go over, but I think things like Krenko, who are based on the number of the power they bring in, or swore there was another one at least. We'll get back to this. But, you know, we've got these creatures that will come in, and by boosting them, we make better creatures that can get through easier, but we also increase the ability of the number of creatures that they create. So that's in sorceries, but we also have a lot of combat tricks in instants. And then moving on, artifacts are just fine, enchantments are generally just good, but it's this instant and sorcery area that I want to focus the most on. As Captain Doge mentioned, the kind of transition of the deck from being a combat trick centered deck into more of a +1/+1 counter centered deck makes sense to me. Not only is it just generally better to have these, you know, buffs in permanent form as the counters on your creature, but it's also worth considering that like the synergies that we have available for +1/+1 counters versus combat tricks, well, leans very much into the +1/+1 counter section, right? Because, well, we're in at least white-green, which already is the best colors for +1/+1 counters, with black and red being very, very close secondaries, with blue being the only one that I think is weak in that area and is not even in the deck. But on the other hand, when we talk about combat tricks, and we're talking usually about a large amount of instances sorceries or spellslinger style decks, well, blue and red and white tend to be really good in those colors, especially blue, and since we do not have access to blue, we're missing a lot of the power that comes along with it. So a lot of these kind of don't catch my attention as much. Now there's some that like I believe will still work really, really well. Obviously the protection spells I'm very much a big fan of, especially on trample creatures. I do also really enjoy our Might of the Masses style cards that work very synergistically with what the deck wants to do. And of course, our MDFCs are great too. All of these are really, really nice. But I will say for things just kind of like Might of Alara, I'm really kind of unimpressed with. Same thing with Gaia's Might, which I do believe they are identical cards. So these are just Giant's Growth, right? I'm not misreading that. They can't be better than Giant's Growth. Oh no, because we have 4. Okay, so they are slightly better than Giant's Growth if we have our 4th land. And I generally do not just, I just don't think that's good enough, right? In comparison to all the others, things like Snakes in Veil that gives +1/+1 counters, things like at least Crumb and Get It will give you Indestructible if you need it. You know, I like those a lot more than a +4/+4. Likewise, cards like Reckless Charge, even though the haste is particularly good, is flashbacked, kind of overcosted for its flashback, and even on its main side, I don't particularly like it. Angel Fire Ignition is at least better because it gives +1/+1 counters and a bunch of different, including haste abilities that, notably Indestructible, that I think makes it a lot better. But even then, like, I think this can be really, really good to throw onto Tana right after you cast her, like the next turn, and get like, so at least 4 power in, not counting your other cards. But when you math that out even, you know, then you're not taking advantage of the haste. So if you want to take advantage of the haste, you want to have 7 mana for Tana. And that's, maybe we can use it with something else like, oh, there we go. This is a card that creates, okay, I feel better. That's on death, but it does create more 1/1s. But if we're looking at these other creatures and we want to attach, you know, this ignition onto them, it feels really clunky, right? We're overpaying for just the haste, which is probably the most important out of all of these. We're also overpaying for 2 +1/+1 counters. So unless we can really take advantage of all of these, which, don't get me wrong, are good things, but I guess the way I would put it is they're not worth more than the sum of their parts. And I think therein is the problem. The fact that you can flashback it, I think, is really nice and makes it a little more playable in my eyes, but I'm just not very big on it. Looking at a few other cards here and there, cards like Bravado, I think, are probably just a bad Might of the Masses. I'd rather this to be an instant so you can get the damage through, less so. I guess that Bravado being permanently on Tana is really, really good, so I guess that's fine, but I guess I'm more interested in... So we've got the build-up that creates our tokens and the payoff when we have the tokens. I'm more interested in the build-up than I am the payoff. And when you are behind after a board clear, or when you just haven't been able to get your token generation off, Bravado is a particularly bad card. It's probably 2 mana for +2/+2, right? And that's only if you have 3 creatures, so it might even just be +1/+1. And with that in mind, I'm not very much so interested in that. I think Cultist of the Absolute is fantastic here. This is a card I really, really do like, and I think it does very, very well here. So this is really nice. Noble Heritage, I think, is okay. I just don't think this is very much so. This is the kind of deck that wants this. You get the protection, notably, so Tana is still vulnerable even if you pile +1/+1 counters onto Tana. And traditionally, you have protection from your opponents anyways in terms of combat damage because you just have such an army of tokens. So this just doesn't feel like where I want this. And at this point, I think I'd just rather a creature like Luminarch Aspirant. Is it Luminarch Aspirant? I could be mixing them up, but the creature that puts +1/+1 counters onto one of your creatures each combat is just going to be more reliable, doesn't need your commanders, and it doesn't necessarily need give your opponents extra +1/+1 counters. Now I know for sure that one of the things that's going to be said about all of these backgrounds is that as you have your commanders out, you get double the effect. That's not necessarily true, but this one it is true, and even then, the problem is this doesn't get better in double, right? The part that gets better is you get more +1/+1 counters, but your opponents who might have been incentivized to get 2 +1/+1 counters and not attack you, for example, are now getting 4 +1/+1 counters. And the opponents that were like maybe on the fence for 2 will do it for 4 for sure. Which once again, you might say, well, then isn't it working as intended? They won't attack me. Well, you and I, mystery viewer, both know that a game of Magic is won more than combat damage. And since all of your permanents, all of your creatures, planeswalkers, and the like have no protection from your opponents, you know, the only way that you're really getting ahead on this is if they really wanted to burn you out of the game. And if they really wanted to burn you out of the game, they're not going to take the deal, right? So to me, this is not very impressive. Likewise, Beastmaster Ascension is a card that I'm always mixed on. I'm not going to suggest to take it out because I can really see its power here, especially with the sheer volume of tokens you create and how this naturally works with your commanders, especially Tana, to get even more tokens out of it. That being said, this isn't a card that generally impresses me. It either is a finisher or it tends to not get cast or linger on the board for a while. And with that in mind, I think I would keep an eye on it. Test this, play with it, see if it does well, because if you're in the right meta, this will do very, very well. If you're in the wrong meta and you create that, army of 30 tokens, play Beastmaster's Ascension, and one of your opponent's board clears the turn after, well, this card hasn't really done anything, right? Granted, if you use it if you can play it and attack with it, it's much better, but still, I just want to bring up my suspicions. Flaming Fist feels very, very weak here. I think it should be, spoilers, don't look at this. Duelists, I think it should be Duelist's Heritage, because it's just so much simpler than it is otherwise. Like, Flaming Fist only gives it to your commanders, and only when they attack, which is fine, because that's generally when you're going to be using them, and you want to attack with your commanders, and both your commanders technically benefit from this, though I'm going to say no, because Tymna can't really attack particularly well, and her ability doesn't work with multiple hits, right? But Duelist's Heritage allows you to give one creature double strike every single combat, or every single attack. And what's really nice about this is not only is this very, very good with Tana, it's just good as a political tool against your opponents. As I've been knocked out of games this way, I've been attacked by something, someone Duelist Heritaged it, and then cast Tainted Strike onto it. Like a third party. Like all my opponents all work together to instant kill me very early in the game with something like this. So I like Duelist Heritage way more than Flaming Fist. Though these backgrounds feel better with multiple commanders, this is definitely one that I don't think is here. Any Joins Up really caught my eye. I really like this here. So I just wanted to take a moment to point out this is a really good call here. I wish it was less mana, but there's only so much that you can do. Not everything is perfect. Looking at a few others, Overpowering Attack, I feel like I'd rather this just be, I don't know, something else, like an overrun effect. because overpowering attack is very, very good when your commander hits, and otherwise particularly bad. Think about it in the sense that if you lose Tana, and let's just say Tymna as well, and you have this respectable army of creatures, let's just say you find ways to anthem them, there are a bunch of 2/2s, I think you would prefer an overrun effect to this, because attacking with like 10 2/2s twice isn't the same as putting like +3/+3 trample, for example, and making sure that damage goes through. So though I like this, and I think you could like in your head look at it as a 3-mana spell, I think it's just fine. Speaking of mana, I never did look through lands and mana value. I think it's because I did earlier when I was looking at the deck, and it's fine. 39 including MDFC, 36 otherwise, and a very, very nice curve. There's no problems there. So just in case someone was wondering if why I didn't bring it up, it's because I do like it. Another thing, Slash the Ranks is kind of interesting. I like the idea because the idea is that you get to keep 2 creatures when your opponents get to keep 1, and that you get to keep Tana with all her +1/+1 counters, allowing for a hit with someone who doesn't have a commander or a tapped commander, and generating a bunch of those tokens as blockers. So in theory, I really like this. In practice, I think I would prefer something like Tragic Arrogance almost 100% of the time. Tragic Arrogance would allow you to still keep Tana. You'd lose Tymna, but I think that's fine. You get to keep, artifact, enchantment, all of those kind of things, but you would choose for each of your opponents the card they keep, and that's a huge, huge difference. Because with that, there's definitely often cards that are worse than their commanders that you would like them to keep, and at the same time, that's going to board wipe them off of their enchantments, their artifacts, and the like. And though we might lose a few things here and there, generally I would like that more. That being said, I do like Slash the Ranks, and I don't think it's a bad idea, so I think it's rather good. Last few cards that I think are worth noting. Asterions, I think it's actually pronounced. Thirst, I think is probably too much. 4 mana for this ability feels a little clunky. I do like it's an instant. I do like you can use it as a combat trick to boost your commander, but I think generally your other removal's a lot better. And this is very dependent, this is dependent on the creature you pick being big, and there's going to be times that this is in your hand, it's the only removal, and you need to remove something, otherwise you're going to lose, or otherwise you're going to get knocked behind, and the fact that this is 4 mana, and maybe it's a small creature, is going to feel rather bad. So the ceiling, really, really high. The floor, very, very low. And I prefer high ceiling cards to have high floors, such as a Chroma's Will, so that's my thought on that. Speaking of high ceiling, low floor, Jetmir feels likewise a little bit kind of cute, but I do see it being very, very good. So I'm going to say Jetmir is fine. But once we go into like Purphoros, which though once again, I get why Purphoros is very, very good here. I think we're already playing Impact Tremors and War Leader's Call, and Purphoros is a card that, once again, is very dependent on your plan going off. And yeah, I guess he's a mana sink for your tokens. I don't know, it's close. I don't love it here. I feel like most of the time it's going to do an impression of one of these cards for more mana, and maybe that's just good enough and not a problem, so perhaps that's fine. Xenagos, I think, is very, very good as the top of the curve. All right, let's move right into additions, because I got a few to go through. Unfortunately, let's see if I can, there we go. Let's go back, because I obviously deleted the one I wanted, but let's start with Scepter of Celebration. So starting in additions, I wanted a few more Tana effects, and I found at least 2, I'm gonna say 2.5. Scepter of Celebration is a very, very straightforward one. I like this a lot. It basically makes any creature into Tana, notably gives the 2 power that Tana has, gives trample that Tana has, and instead of creating sapperlings, they create citizen creature tokens. Is there a plus or a minus to the difference in tokens? I'm gonna say no. I think they're pretty much the same, but I do really, really like the fact that we can not only have this on any other creature, including a token to start getting this effect. Further, we could just put this on Tana and get double triggers, right? And though this doesn't work with our other Annie joins up thing because the trigger comes from this artifact and not the legendary creature, I think that's still fine to generate a ton of tokens all at once, and it's a rather cheap card. A not rather cheap card is Wand of Orcus. I don't know why. This is like very, very much so worse than the other card. I think it's because it's like a zombie kindred theme card, and I think people like that, and it gives death touch. Sure. I think obviously Trample Death Touch is very, very good because I think you have, I could be wrong about this. I think you can it doesn't even say. So if you block this with something with Trample, does this trigger before you choose damage? Yes, because you assign damage before damage. Sorry, back on track. This works really well by giving Tana Trample, is that you get to then assign 1 point of damage because of the Death Touch to every single blocker, and the rest goes through as damage. However, if someone is triple blocking or more Tana, it's because they want Tana dead. So yes, it'll be nice to get more tokens out of it, but it is worth noting that you will not get to keep your Tana, which is not that much of a problem because once again, this generates a bunch of tokens on hit, that many being that beautiful, beautiful collection of words that we like. Except for these are 2/2s, which are twice as strong. So you might say this is probably like, maybe this is twice as strong. I kind of like the other one because I think Trample and extra power is very, very relevant. Like that +2 is another whole zombie, quote unquote, in damage, which I like, and the Trample is very much so more impactful than the Death Touch. Still, this is really good. For some reason, it's $10, but if you could play both, I would. Then you have 2 redundant pieces that work just like your commander that can be attached to any creature. Moving forward, we have Kadira, Color of the Small, a card I really, really like, and I think works really, really well here. Though she doesn't work like identically to Tana, she works pretty closely, right? She basically doubles all of your tokens into 1/1 white rabbits. And if you attack with her and Tana, you obviously stack the triggers so Tana's ability resolves first, and then Kadira turns that number of tokens, like the total number you have, into rabbits. Is she win more? I think this is a bit tricky because she does fit very much so in a lot of the aspects of win more. She requires your commander to be out. She is much better when you're ahead. She's okay in neutral, and she's bad when you're behind. All that being said, due to her low mana cost, due to the ability to put trample on her, due to her inherent trample, and that's why that works well with +1/+1 counters, the way she would work with both Scepter and Wand really, really well, and then if you have any other tokens generated from previous things or just lying around there, all of a sudden she starts going really, really quickly and being very, very strong, right? Her damage, she doesn't need to do enough damage, like her amount doesn't matter unless you equip one of the equipments. It's just getting that damage in, and I particularly like that. I will also note that because she kind of doubles every time, her by herself, as long as you have that first token, will technically double your tokens turn after turn, and I like that as a doubling effect much more than, one of the more common ways to do it. So, big fan of her. Going away from generators to a few cards that I think you would very much so benefit from. Quetzal, I think, is just a fantastic card in your colors. I think this protection ability is just very strong, but whenever one or more creatures you control with power greater than its base hit a player, draw a card, works really, really well with +1/+1 counters, and works really, really well with your double strike or first strike abilities as well, because each of those will make it another, another trigger or instance of damage being dealt to a player, drawing you an additional card. Very, very great card. Very great to put +1/+1 counters on them, and you could put the Wand or the Scepter and make them into Tana, which would be rather good. Another card that is very, very strong and works for card draw is Toski. Toski is just a card that's good. I have a hard time really going into it more than that. For card draw, especially in token generation decks, especially when you are mass generating tokens, Toski is very, very good. Now, I want to take a moment to point out Toski and Tymna work kind of oppositely, whereas Tymna wants you to spread out damage, but Toski wants you to pile on damage to the one player who can't block you. So there's a bit of tension there, but if the tension exists where both of those are options, you'll just take Toski and generate, what, like 10 cards and give up on maybe 2 cards that you would have gotten from Tymna, and I think you'll be fine with it. So with that in mind, I think Toski belongs here quite a bit. Here's one of the cards that I am being a little spicy by including, and that's Contaminant Grafter. I've been playing this in my +1/+1 deck, more of a proliferate deck, but with, can't remember their name. My goodness. My Phyrexian Abzan Commander. Regardless, I really, really like this card in any deck that has +1/+1 counters. For this ability right here, this one is good enough for the 5 mana. The fact that it itself is a 5/5 trample toxic 1 is very, very good. And then the Corrupted being even better as a like gravy, because this deck doesn't have any ways to put poison counters on, is just a great package. Generally think of it like this. If you are able to play this card and you're able to use that Tymna ability to hit 3 opponents, at the end of each of your turns, you're going to put 3 +1/+1 counters on your creatures with +1/+1 counters. That's really, really good. If a later turn comes by and the Grafter is able to attack and get that toxic 1 in, that player is guaranteed, if you could hit at least one other player, you'll get 2 or more proliferates, right? And then you'll be able to get them to poison 3, and then the Corrupted will automatically trigger, which allows you to draw a card and put a land on the battlefield. This is just a good card. I think people hone into this word, toxic and corrupted, like really, really aggressively. They tunnel vision and they don't see the sheer power of this card. I am 100% on board with this card, and I think it's very, very good. And once again, even though you're more token interested than you are +1/+1 counter interested, I think this is something definitely worth trying, especially if you can easily put +1/+1 counters across your board even once, which I'll have something for that. You will be very, very happy with the results. Mass Hysteria is here for both Mass Hysteria and Concordant Crossroads. I do think this deck benefits heavily from haste, and I do think the kind of haste that's given to all of your opponents, though they tend to attack more and have less blockers, is going to be very, very good for this deck. Both of these cards are cheaper than they've been in a long time, especially since Mass Hysteria has this awesome Secret Lair art, and I think Concordant Crossroads has gone down in price. It might have been creeping back up, but it was printed not long ago. Let's see. Okay, it's back up to about $20, so probably start with Mass Hysteria, and I think you'd be pretty happy with it. I don't think you need to run both. Obviously, the Crossroads are better because you're running green more than red, but either of these will be very good, and I think you'll be happy with the results. Another card that I very much so like is Predator's Hour. Predator's Hour gives you another reason to get damage through. This gives all your creatures menace, and when they deal combat damage to a player, you get that top card, and you can cast it for the rest of the game. This is, in a lot of ways, kind of what I want from your quote-unquote combat troops. This gives evasion and a form of card advantage, and it scales better when you have all of those tokens, right? I think generally there will be turns where you need Tana to get through and you just need Menace, and you'll be willing to cast Predator's Hour to trigger that Menace. And then on the turns where you do have all those tokens and they're not particularly scary and you just need to get hits in, Predator's Hour once again will be really, really good there. Get a bunch of hits in through the Menace. I mean, Tymna might be a bit happy, Toski will definitely be happy, and then you'll draw a bunch of cards off your opponent's deck that you can play the rest of the game. So a card I really do like, probably one of the weaker cards I have suggested, but something that does really catch my eye. This was the one I was thinking of that I think you should definitely play and gives +1/+1 counters to your board. It's Song of Freyalise. Song of Freyalise is just very strong of turning all of your token creatures into mana dorks for 2 turns, and then after which giving you a mini overrun effect with a lot more of an upside than most overruns do, because most overruns just put a bunch of power and toughness and trample. This gives vigilance, indestructible, and the power and toughness is in a counter. Really, really do like this. Gives you really, really strong attacks at points where you might feel like you didn't have a good attack, which is something that happens in these kind of decks, and I noticed this as well, is that we might get into like mid-game board states where attacks become less profitable, and you're looking to dig for your next thing to allow the attack to be profitable, whether it be a combat trick, equipment, +1/+1 counters, removal, etc., etc. But if you have Song of Freyalise played early, it usually comes off of its third chapter around that time, and all of a sudden you have a free attack that costs you nothing. Your opponents have to decide whether they're going to lose creatures blocking, and even if they have generally like a few bigger creatures that can like wall off some of your creatures, they usually do not have, like there's usually not all three of your opponents have a million 10/10s, let's say, for you not to get through. So one way or another, you will get some profit from the attack, and it will have cost you nothing, which I think is very, very good. Not even including just like mid to late game, if you just slam Song of Freyalise for 2 mana and you've got like 10 creature tokens, and all of a sudden you just ramped for the next 2 turns aggressively. So also a big fan of that. Speaking of things to do in terms of overruns, Overwhelming Stampede is the one that catches my eye that I'd like you to play. It just really works well with the deck, not just in the sense that it allows you to make the most of having a lot of 1/1s and one really big creatures with +1/+1 counters, but it also kind of works as a very good impression of double strike, or even better than double strike the second you have a second creature, right? There's going to be situations where Tana is going to be very, very big, and you're very close to knocking someone out due to commander damage, whereas giving them like pseudo double strike would be enough to win the game. And this is pseudo double strike, right? It just doubles power and toughness of your larger creature. But like I said, if you have one additional creature, just one creature, it can be a 0/1, right? Then you get even more of a benefit. All of a sudden that creature becomes incredibly large as well, and all of a sudden you're attacking very, very profitably. So big fan of this card. There's a lot of versions of this card, you know, there's a lot of overruns effects. This one is the one I think is the best for this deck. I know we're playing the Infect card. Maybe I should have mentioned that earlier when I was looking at the Grafter, that you do technically play play Infect, I should say, but that's obviously meant as a one-shot kill because you don't have Proliferate. So generally, I think this is a little better than that, because there'll be a lot of situations where regular damage will kill an opponent, but I think Infect damage will just miss it a little bit. I don't know. That's my opinion. Still, I think you could play both without much downside. Coming to my final card, I just love throwing this out there. Jailbreak is just a fantastic card. You're playing fetch lands, you're playing a lot of cards that you would like to keep, and generally I'm a fan of trading my opponent's cards from their graveyards for my cards out of my graveyard, and Jailbreak does that very, very fairly. I think this gets a lot better with our equipment that I noted at the start of my additions, because I think they are vulnerable to hate, and getting them back is going to make a huge difference. All right, that's all I have to say. I hope this was helpful. This looks like a really, really fun deck, and I can see this doing really, really well and creating giant armies. There's probably still a lot more cards that I could have suggested. The budget of 300, my goodness, I wish I could budget $300 to upgrade a deck. I think we could be doing things like putting in Ocelot's Pride, putting in the new Ajani from MH3, a bunch of other really, really powerful cards for free, I mean within that budget for free. Maybe I should change how I say that. By spending the money, we could play those cards really easily in a deck like this, but I don't see that necessarily making the deck more fun or consistent, just stronger. So I'll leave that up to you to decide. Otherwise, I hope this video has been helpful to you. Good luck, and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.